Hey, good morning, everybody. Day 6, term 5, end of the third week. Going to be talking some more about the economy, types of economies today, something called the circular flow. Anybody have any idea what that circular flow might be referring to? Well, what happened to my slideshow? Hang on just a minute. Circular flow in the economy, very common way to describe how money flows in the economy. Think about your own financial situation. Money comes in when you get paid, money goes out when you pay for things, right? Well, who does that go to? Who does that come from? Who does that go to? You know, you're gonna receive income from your job. You're gonna pay businesses for stuff that you buy. Goodness, excuse me. The third part, so if you are an individual, you're also part of a household. So what I just described includes households and businesses. Anybody want to guess what the third part of the circular flow is? There's 3 major components in every economy. The third component is government. Because what happens when you buy something at the store? You're going to pay sales tax, right? When you get income from your job once a year, you got to pay income tax. I mean, that money, that tax money is taken out of your check every time you get paid, it goes to the government. Well, what do you get back from the government? Well, right now, you guys are at the Excel Center, and that is partially paid for by property taxes, or mostly paid for by property taxes in Indiana. So if you're a property owner, you're paying taxes to the government, and you're helping us, me, to have a job, and you guys to get a free education. So government does a lot of different things like that. Military spending is part of what government does with our tax money. You know, the other day we looked at all the different things that government does with taxation, tax money, and money that it raises through borrowing. So there's a huge list. And the whole concept of that is, you know, you pay those taxes or fees or what have you, and you get some types of goods or services back from the government. So if you look at this graphic here between households, businesses, and the government, you've got arrows that are going in 2 different directions. You got 2 circles that are kind of working around each other. So households and businesses have this relationship. We provide labor for the businesses to operate. We make payments to businesses when we buy products. Continuing on around from the business to the government, they're going to pay taxes. They're going to collect sales tax, pass it on to the government. They may also provide some goods and services for government. Who knows? I mean, there's lots of, not everything that the government does is done by a government agency. It might be overseen by a government agency through some private sector business or a not-for-profit. But those goods and services got to come from somewhere. The other direction, excuse me, let me continue on that same direction. From government to households, they provide services like police, fire, military protection, programs such as food stamps, welfare, etc. All of those things that people need that maybe they can't provide for themselves, government's providing those. So if you go the other direction, households, here's again labor. That's one of the main things that we have to contribute to the circular flow is our labor. If it goes to businesses, then we're an employee of the business, but there's a lot of people that have jobs in government. And everybody pays taxes. I forget who the quote's from, but they say the only sure things are death and taxes. Well, don't want to find out about the first one, but for sure, everybody's got some familiarity with taxes. Government, if government hires businesses to do things, to provide those services, then they're going to pay them for that. They don't just get it. Businesses don't just do it for free. Continuing around that circle counterclockwise, businesses also then provide income to households as well as goods and services. If you have to hire a lawyer, you got to go to the doctor. Those are examples of typical services that people might need, and businesses are going to be in a position to provide those. Maybe you work for one of those type of businesses and you're going to get income from it. Circular flow. So let's see what Mr. Clifford has to say about the circular flow.
Writing's not that easy, but
Hey, this is Jacob Clifford. Welcome to ACDC Econ. Today I'm going to show you something that's all around you that most people don't even see. It's called the Matrix, and you're inside it right now. The circular flow matrix or model shows how products, resources, and money flow in the economy. Now look at your surroundings. Seriously, take a moment and look around you. The matrix is everywhere.
It is all around us, even now in this very room.
In a market economy, there's households, which is just people like you and me, and there's also businesses. Now, businesses sell goods and services to the household in something called the product market. It's not like just one place. It's anywhere things are sold, like online or the mall, the street corner, anywhere you can buy stuff. The computer or phone in front of you right now is a great example. You didn't produce that. A business did, and they sold it to you in the product market. The same thing applies to your chair or pencil or the book over there, everything around you. But to make those goods and services, businesses need resources like workers and machines. In the free market, households own the resources and they're sold to the businesses in the resource market. Economists point out that there's 4 categories of resources or 4 factors of production. The first one is land, which is any natural resource or anything that comes from Mother Nature. Then there's labor, then capital, which is tools and machines. And finally, someone to bring it all together, the entrepreneur. That's why it's called the circular flow matrix. Those resources are being used by the business to produce the products that people turn around and go buy. Now, what about money? Well, it goes the other direction. When you buy your phone in the product market, you had to pay them money. That's called consumer spending. Now, that money makes its way to the businesses, and they call it revenue. But the business doesn't get to keep all that money. They've got to pay for resources, and that's called the cost of production. It's being paid to engineers that develop the phone. Those engineers earn income. Economists break down income into 4 different types that go along with each of the 4 factors of production. They're called factor payments. When you sell land, you earn rent. When you sell labor, you earn wages. For capital, you get interest. And for entrepreneurship, you get profit. So this is it, the circular flow matrix that shows how a market economy works. Now, let me ask you a few questions to see if you really understand the matrix. First question, is your local mall an example of the product market or the resource market? It's both. Some people are there to buy products in the product market, but there's some people who are working or trying to get a job, and that's a resource market. So products, resources, and money are all being exchanged. Okay, next question. Do businesses demand or supply? The answer is both. They demand in the resource market, but they supply in the product market. Households, on the other hand, demand in the product market, and they supply in the resource market. So both businesses and households are supplying and demanding. So far, this model is showing the private sector with just households and businesses. But there's a bunch of important things missing, like national defense, schools, and roads. Those things aren't produced by businesses. So let's add in the government and the public sector. The size and role of the government in the economy depends on a country's economic system, but in most market economies, the government still plays a role. First, the government buys goods and services from businesses in the product market, for example, fire trucks. And just like households, they pay for them. That's called government spending. The government also buys resources in the resource market, like teachers and firefighters. Again, it pays for those resources, which is again called government spending. The government then turns around and provides public goods and services like fire protection, schools, roads, and bridges to businesses and households. The government also pays money to businesses called subsidies or households called welfare. Economists call those transfer payments. There are situations when the government's giving out money, but not for goods and services. It's to meet some other objective, like to alleviate poverty or get companies to produce more fuel-efficient cars. But how does the government afford to provide public goods and welfare and subsidies? Well, they tax businesses and households. Income taxes and sales taxes fund government projects and programs. Now, there's several things still missing from this matrix, including a financial sector where money isn't spent, it's saved and then loaned out, and also the role of other countries with exports and imports. But for now, this diagram gives you a pretty good idea of how the modern economy works. One final thought. In the movie, the Matrix enslaves people.
You are a slave, Neo. Like everyone else, you were born into bondage.
Many people wonder if capitalism and this hamster wheel of constantly spending and earning and spending and earning enslaves people. Now, would your life be better off if you pulled a Thoreau and just lived out in the woods? I don't know, but what I do know is there's a lot of things you'd have to live without. First, there'd be no cell phones or computers, so say goodbye to YouTube. And also, there'd be no modern medicine or hospitals. It would be nice if none of us had to work, but there's a trade-off to that. So does the Matrix enslave us or liberate us? Let me know in the comments below, all right? Thanks for watching. Till next time.
Yeah, we've talked some about the circular flow already, and I'm pretty sure that we've seen this video before also. But it's important because the segue from the circular flow is, and the part that is really to be emphasized for now is, what type of economy are we working in? Most people look at the world functioning in a market economy, right? We've talked about capitalism as a function of the market economy, where people are working and doing things for profit. Other types of economies are operated differently in different countries. But there's one thing that all of these types of economies, no matter where you're at in the world, and historically this is true also, what do all of these things have in common? What do these economies, what does every country in the world still have to do? Every society has to do with other societies in terms of economics. Anybody have any ideas on that? Well, where do all these goods and services come from? Do we get everything that we need here in America from American companies? No. Yeah, from China and from lots of other countries are producing goods and services sometimes that are sold in America. That's the nature of a market economy. You know, we want quality products, but we're going to buy them at the lowest possible price that we can afford. So now you're talking about imports and exports. And in a global sense, it really refers to something called trade in general. So I got to find the next thing that we're going to look at here. So hang on just one second. Okay, so here's a Jamboard that's in the materials for this week. Talks about trade. What kind of things do you trade, or do you trade for? Now, in the old days, go ahead, Brianna. Yeah, yeah, we're trading money for products. Exactly right. And whether it's at a store down the block, or whether it's through Amazon online, or whether it's through some company that ships it from overseas, that's still part of what they generally call trade. Every country in the world is involved in it. It doesn't have to be money though that gets traded. If you're familiar with the barter system, anybody ever go to a flea market and you negotiate the price of something, or say you're going to trade what you got for something that they have? That's the barter system. That's the way trade used to be done. Now, historically, human society has always involved trade. We've never been able to get everything that we needed in whatever location that we were in, whether you're talking about ancient trade routes through Asia, like the Silk Road, or whether you're talking about pre-Columbian United States when it was all Native Americans. They had trade routes. So trade in broad economic terms doesn't necessarily mean product for product. I'm going to trade you 2 of these baseball cards for 2 of your baseball cards. It means trading something of value for something else of value. What's that? Yeah. Yep. Gold that's stored in the Federal Reserve. It's a really good example of something that has historically been used in trade. Now, most monetary systems aren't tied to gold anymore because gold is too much fluctuation of value. Here's a definition of trade that we can work with. It's the exchange of one good or service for another. When there's a voluntary trade, both parties benefit. When you fill your car with gas, you value the gas more than the money you trade to get it. The gas station owner values the money you pay more than the gas he gives you. So both parties are better off because that trade took place. Goes on to say another example might be the scalping of professional sports tickets outside a stadium. Well, the person has the tickets, they'd rather have the money than to go inside and see the game. So if they can trade, they can sell those tickets to somebody else, they'd rather have the money and they're going to go away happy, and then somebody's going to get into the game and they're going to be happy. So both parties have benefited. So this next question here may be something you've never thought about. What is a fair trade? Is it going to depend on the situation? For sure. Had a couple of yeses here in the room. That's good. Fair trade, again, both parties on either end of the trade are going to benefit. Both parties are going to walk away happy. They each get something that they value. They're going to leave that transaction and say, well, that was fair. I didn't feel like I got forced to pay something more than I should have, or I didn't have to take a product that I thought was inferior. So fairness is a big deal in terms of trade, and not just between you and the retailer, but globally. Does anyone know this next person's name here? Milton Friedman. very famous economist, Nobel Prize winner. He's going to talk a little bit about trade in the Americas. And he's going to mention some things that maybe you're not at all familiar with. This is from an old interview. It's not letting me copy. Okay, so this is an old television interview that Milton Friedman did probably almost 30 years ago, talking about free trade in a global economy, which is certainly where we are nowadays.
Professor Friedman, in the realm of politics and the realm of power, so much has happened in the past few years that people are ready to believe the unbelievable. I mean, if the Berlin Wall can fall, anything can happen. But in the realm of economics, where things are much more day to day and the rules are kind of unforgiving, is such a revolution underway according to you, or is it just more of the same?
No, there is a revolution underway, in my opinion. It's a dual revolution, too. One is purely technological, and that's the improvements in communication, transportation, and the like. And the reason they're a revolution is because they've made it possible for a company located anywhere to use resources located anywhere, that is people, building, material capital, to produce products anywhere and sell it anywhere and be located anywhere. For the first time, a truly global economy is possible. If I buy something in the United States with a company's name on it, that company may be located in New York, but it may have most of its business in China or in Africa or somewhere else. The product I buy may have some American, may have some items that originated in America, but many of the items may have come from anywhere. Now, the reason that has been important, and it's been going on now for about 20 odd years or more, is because it makes available to current technological knowledge, to capital, human and physical, located in the advanced countries. It makes available a range of low-cost labor that wasn't before available. That's what happened. That's the way in which Hong Kong, Taiwan, Korea, the tigers of China, of East Asia, have been able to develop. What kept them from doing it before? The fact that you didn't have the communication, transportation possibilities. That's had a very important effect, independently of the political revolution, which I'll turn to in a moment. The effect of that has been that it's made the returns, the wages, the income of people with high skills in the advanced countries go up relative to the wages of people with low skills in advanced countries. So that the differential between the skilled and unskilled in the advanced countries, in Canada, in the United States, Germany, etc., have been widening for about 20 odd years. On the other hand, it has meant that the income of formerly low-cost, low-paid labor in the developing countries has been going up steadily over that period. So it's had very different consequences in different parts of the world in that respect.
Now, you mentioned different parts of the world, and indeed, people in Canada and the US are starting to get awfully lonely now when they keep hearing about these fabulous growth rates in Asia. And you know, if the textbook says that eventually prosperity should spread itself around the globe, they're thinking, well, when is it going to happen to us? When is it coming to North America? Because we're not doing so well.
No, and that's because we're not letting it. Because we're doing our best to frustrate the forces that are trying to help us.
What could we do?
Open our boundaries, cut down on tariffs. We don't need, I favor Nafta because it was a little step in the right direction, but it doesn't go nearly far enough. We don't need walls against goods coming from abroad. What we need is rather to let down our barriers, to open them up, and to take advantage of the opportunities for cooperation around the world.
Anybody have any thoughts on hearing Mr. Friedman? And again, that was an interview from 1994, so almost 30 years ago. Anything jump out at you? I'm sorry, say that again. Trade hasn't really changed. In some ways, that's true, yeah. What's the revolution he's talking about, though? Two things he mentions, and that's where trade really has changed, and especially since 1994. Two things he mentioned that are part of this revolution in the global economy: transportation and communication. When was the last time you sent a fax to anybody? Maybe you never have. Yeah. In the 1990s, that was the fastest method of communication before most businesses had online presences. So telephone technology, internet technology, communications technology, and especially now, think about what you can do with Amazon today. Amazon hadn't even been thought of in 1994. The internet was something that was a few people were on at that point in time, but nothing anywhere close to what it is now. But you can be anywhere in the world, anywhere in the US especially, and order something from Amazon in the morning. And a lot of times they can deliver it to you the same day. Or 1-day shipping or 2-day shipping if you want to pay a little bit extra. So that really is revolutionary. You know, you can place an order. He talks about placing an order from anywhere, building a company anywhere, using resources from anywhere, using people from anywhere. And, you know, if you think about him talking about these things that many years ago and seeing where we're at right now, it's no wonder the guy won the Nobel Prize for economics, because he was very visionary. And Friedman is a huge proponent of free trade. I don't know if you heard him mention Nafta. Anybody ever heard of that acronym, Nafta? Stands for North American Free Trade Agreement. Nafta, something if you don't follow the news, you may not have heard of it. At the time it was adopted, it was fairly controversial. The North American Free Trade Agreement gave companies in the US, Canada, and I think in Mexico the opportunity to trade back and forth across those borders basically without restriction, or with minimal restrictions. What was the effect of that? Did Auto manufacturing, did the American auto manufacturers all have to stay in America then to build cars that they could ship to different places? Not anymore. They started moving plants to where labor was the cheapest. Across the border in Mexico, across the border in Canada. Because now it didn't matter where the plants are located, they could ship anywhere they wanted. Another term that Friedman uses that you should know from recent news reports is tariff. I can't spell American right. Apparently that's not correct. There we go. Well, it looks better. Tariff. It's a tax on imports. Friedman says we haven't opened our boundaries up enough. He says we don't need tariffs. Well, what did the last administration do with products from China? They established tariffs. Tariffs on imports from China. Okay. Politically, it sounds good. It sounds like they're doing something to help American companies, right? Because what happens, what happens to those products now where that tariff has been applied? They're still going to be imported. Those imports from China are still going to come to America, even when you add the tariff or that tax on top of it. What happens though to the price? It goes up. We pay more for it. So we as the consumer, we end up suffering. You can look at the history of tariffs throughout modern economic times. They have never worked. They sound good. Politically, people love to talk about establishing tariffs on foreign goods being imported, but it doesn't work. It does not help support American production. It just makes things cost more. So that's the big thing about Friedman's comments there, that trade as a global entity that we participate in has a lot of room for growth, and as the regulations are loosened up, we become even more intertwined globally. Anybody have comments or questions on any of that so far? And if you link this back to how the circular flow works, Mr. Clifford only hinted at it at the end of his video, talking about we don't have imports and exports on this graphic. Well, what happens when we import things from other countries? Where's our money go? It goes to those other countries. The U.S. has a trade deficit because we import more than we export. That's not necessarily a good thing, not in the long term. You know, we'd like to be able to sell more stuff to other countries and have more money coming in. That's better for the U.S. economy. But we're not quite there yet. That's something that is still a work in progress. Nobody's really been able to figure that out. Anybody want to guess as to why that's the case? How do labor costs in America compare to the rest of the world? Maybe you've never thought about that. Do you know anybody that works a union job? They probably make a pretty good wage. Nothing wrong with that. That's the way things have developed in the U.S. The United States standard of living is much higher than most of the rest of the world because our labor rates are so much higher. So is it any wonder that companies, when given the chance, are going to take their production somewhere else where the labor costs are lower? They're capitalists. They're in the business of making a profit. They want to make as much money as they can. That's, some people would say that's the American way, make as much profit as you can. So that's the real balancing act on all this stuff with global or international trade. The cost of labor is driving a lot of it. So I want to go back and pick up some things that go back a few thousand years. So hang on just a second. Okay, a minute ago I mentioned something called the Silk Road. Anybody ever heard of that? Well, I think y'all know what silk is, right? Very fine, it's kind of shiny, very, very nice to the touch, a very elegant fabric. China has been the primary source of silk for thousands of years. So we're not talking about a road that's paved with silk, but it is a trade route that goes all the way back to China. I can enlarge this. Long before America had been discovered by, quote unquote, discovered by Columbus. I think we all know by now that Columbus didn't really discover America. There were other people here first, plus Native Americans were here long before that. But back before 1492, most of the rest of the world only knew about Europe and Africa and Asia. And so trade back then, you think maybe it only extended down the block or within, you know, within Italy, for instance, among Italians. Well, that's not true at all. There was global trade. There has always been global trade. As long as man has been creating products, every region is able to produce something different. And so they had something to offer other parts of the world and they could trade for that. So back say 3,000-4,000 years ago, there was no euro, there was no dollar. So what did they trade for? How did somebody, a businessman working on this Silk Road, how did they make their living? Trading stuff for stuff, right? Yeah. Maybe in some areas they got gold coins. Maybe somewhere else they traded for rugs. Look here with around the center part, the ray, Persians. I think that refers to rugs. Maybe that's the Persian society. Petra, I think, is in Jordan. They had their products and it was a major shipping area to the Mediterranean Sea and to everything in Italy and France and England, etc. So these trade routes, it wasn't like you would get on a ship in Rome and travel all the way to China. That's not how the trade used to work. They would be trading posts, you know, maybe 50 miles apart. And so your business might be to go back and forth between two trading posts. You never knew what was going to be there. So you would pick up some items in one area that were valuable, take them to another trading post, trade for something else. Maybe a new shipment had just come in from Turkey or from East Asia or from India. How much what? How much were gold coins back then? You know, that's a really good question because there was no universal money. So it probably varied from country to country. But if you traded, if your main activity or your area of trade was within one country, no big deal. You knew what the money was valued at. You know, the Romans have had coins, gold coins, you know, for 2,000 years. And there's other societies that have coinage like that, gold coins even older. So to a certain extent, the value of those coins is going to be determined by what they could trade them for. You know, maybe they got a big bolt of silk material for 2 gold coins, I don't know, or 10 gold coins. And it was all negotiated. So, and what was the transportation like? Probably maybe some of them on donkeys, horseback, horse and wagon, perhaps. In some parts of the world, they were using camels. You can guarantee that. So, and of course, there were ships, maybe not giant ocean-going ships like they had later in the 500-600 years ago. But there were there were sailors working from area to area. Because over here on the left, you've got Rome, Italy, you got Greece, the city Byzantium, that's actually in Turkey. Come around here into Egypt. Alexandria was one of the biggest shipping locations. It's on the Nile River, that the Nile River could take you down into Africa. Alexandria also was a fantastic place of culture. They had one of the earliest libraries of manuscripts and scrolls from all parts of the ancient world. A lot of that was destroyed during different wars over the years. So every area of the world, even back then, say 2,000-3,000 years ago, had something to trade with somebody else. And so that Silk Road was generally this loose collection of trade routes. Everybody knew where they were. I would guess that if you took a map of this area now and laid out where roads for cars and trucks have been placed, or maybe train tracks, a lot of them are on very similar locations as these original trade routes. Because for sure, that's what happened here in America. Some good questions so far. Anybody else have a question or a comment before I go forward a few hundred years? The Silk Road? I'm not sure that it technically has ever ended, because there are still parts of the world over there that are still trading that same way. I'm sorry, Sarah? Yeah, and that's a great point. Technology has changed tremendously. Back then, it was kind of just the luck of the draw. When you got to the marketplace and whatever had been brought in, that was what you could trade for. Nobody was placing orders back then. You know, it wasn't like you'd call somebody up or send a telegram, or I mean, clearly no internet or anything like that. It was all word of mouth. It was person to person. It was individual trade. And there are still some parts of the world that are still doing that. There are trading posts that are like that in some of the less developed. Okay, it looks like it's coming back now. So apologize for another little brief internet outage for some reason, so I don't know how that affected the recording. So the next thing I want to show you though is coming forward a few thousand years after America had been discovered. And it's loosely labeled as colony trade routes. And so this might have been 1500s, 1600s, 1700s, up to the 1800s before, you know, you had any kind of, you know, certainly no airplanes or anything like that. That didn't happen until the 1900s. But back before, after the Americas were discovered, the people that, the countries that ruled the trade globally were the ones that had shipping empires. England, they colonized most of a good chunk of the world as their own colonies. I mean, that's how America started, as a colony of England for purposes of trade. You know, that was, once America was discovered, they created the colonies here because they wanted access to the goods and raw materials that they saw were available here in America. Colonies that were established elsewhere around the world were established for basically the same reason. What could the home country get from those colonies? The French did the same thing. The French had colonies all over the place. If you don't know this, maybe you should look it up, but India, believe it or not, India was a colony of England. It was controlled by England until Gandhi came along and basically helped create a free state in India. France was huge in the international trading because they could build ships. Portugal, you know, Christopher Columbus actually sailed to America with the blessing of Queen Isabel from Portugal. And I think he was Italian. So, you know, your nationality didn't matter as much back then as where you could get the ships and how you could sail from one place to another. Spain was big in shipping also. And before the Suez Canal was constructed here between in the Middle East, connecting Africa to the Middle East, you see this big red line that goes all the way around the south of Africa? That's how ships had to sail to get to India or further to the east to get to Korea, Japan, and China. You had to go all the way around the south point of Africa to get there. So that was hard. And you know what that gave rise to out on the sea? Who else was out there on ships that might have been interested in the shipping trade in the oceans? Was everybody involved in shipping? Were they all nice people? No. Anybody here a Johnny Depp fan?
Pirates.
Pirates. Yeah. Thank you, Jonathan. That's right. Pirates, piracy on the open seas. And people still today search for those sunken ships because of what they carried. Gold, you know, they might have brought wine from Italy back to England. They might have bought silk and spices from India and China. What else came from China back 1,000 years ago? Gunpowder. People needed gunpowder when they started figuring out how to make guns. So, you know, all that stuff was on a boat somewhere. And if you were a pirate captain and you wanted to take over another ship like that, they risked it. That's what they did. So that was a whole new era of of shipping. I mean, if you think about the Silk Road trade, people probably still got robbed, but the quantities were not so big. And that's one of those improvements in transportation that Friedman talked about 30 years ago. Think about how transportation had improved from the Silk Road days to the colony days when they had the big ships. Improved tremendously. Sarah here in class talked about how her family would write letters to each other, and it might take them a month to get a letter back and forth because of the timing involved with the shipping and the delivery. Same kind of thing happened back then. If somebody in America was ordering some silk from somebody in England, they would pass that message back on a sailing ship. 6 months later, maybe a different ship would come back with the product. So transportation and communication, two consistently important issues with trade throughout all of history. So any comments or questions about that? All right, now I got another map to pull up. So here's a map of North America. One of the biggest I'm going to call it a fallacy because it's kind of a myth. You know, when the English and other explorers, quote unquote, discovered America, that what they encountered were people they thought were primitive. And in some ways, the Native Americans certainly did not have the technology in terms of weaponry and transportation that Europe had, but it was a different type of a environment that they operated in. They didn't need it. The Native Americans did not concern themselves with property ownership. A lot of the tribes were nomadic. They moved from place to place. They moved according to the weather, according to the availability of buffalo herds, for instance. That's probably a stereotype, but it's true. They did do that. But they had just as sophisticated of trade networks as any place else in the world before Europeans came here. And it's not just in North America. I don't know if this map goes all the way down. Yeah, it does go down to a little bit of Mexico. But if you know anything about the Incas and the Mayan civilizations from South America, Central and South America, those people were technologically quite advanced long before the Spaniards came down there. And then what happened? What was the number one thing that impacted the native populations? They got taken over, yes, but how did most of them die? It wasn't because of fights. It wasn't because of gun battles. It was from disease. The Europeans brought with them to the West, to the North American, Central America, South America. They brought with them diseases that the native populations had no immune defense against. And more natives were killed as a result of disease than ever died in any battles. Very, very similar. You know, you'd have these epidemics that would occur and they'd wipe out whole cities. They had no defense against it. They didn't have any medicine like that. I mean, it just wasn't, they weren't prepared to deal with a totally different population like that coming into the North American arena. But if you look over here along where it says Appalachian Mountains, you see this very long line here that goes from Boston all the way down to the Chattahoochee and Savannah rivers. That's basically around near where Atlanta, Georgia is.
Your map isn't on the.
It's not. Well, why didn't somebody say something?
There it goes.
Been talking about it for 5 minutes and nobody said anything. Come on, guys. Help me out here. This line I'm talking about right over here from Boston all the way down to the southeast. It's called the Appalachian Trail. It still exists. You can go walk that trail yourself. And that's what people did. They walked that trail. That's what the Native Americans did. That's one of the major trade routes from the east, the northeast, down into the southeastern part of the US. Look around here, you got Michigan. Look at what they're following. They were sailing on the Great Lakes, Lake Michigan, Lake Huron, Lake Erie, into Canada, down the Ohio River, all the way over here to Pittsburgh, what Pittsburgh is now. You see Detroit, Michigan right here? Detroit was a Native American trading post. So was Fort Wayne, Indiana. They're on the river. Follow the Wabash River on down to where it meets the Ohio to Evansville. Vincennes, Indiana, Evansville, Indiana, both trading posts for Native Americans. So they might not have had big ships, but they were certainly using boats to trade. If they couldn't get the boat through a particular area because of rapids or shallow water, something like that. Sorry about that. If they couldn't get it through, they'd have to pick up the boat and carry it down to the next place where they could get back in the water and continue their journey. And you know, even all the way up here into Minnesota, the Dakotas, you can travel by river all the way down the Mississippi. The Ohio River goes into the Mississippi all the way to New Orleans. So there was a lot of massive scale trading going on in North America long before Columbus ever came here. And our road system largely is based on the trails that Native Americans created, because where they would have to come up out of the river and follow a trail, that's where a road would end up. If you go, and I'll give you an example of it right here in central Indiana. I mean, if you don't know Indiana's history, you should know that it's named because of the populations of Native Americans that were here when the settlers came, when the Europeans came, the Miami Indians, the Potawatomi, the Delaware Indians. So many tribes were right here in Indiana. Delaware County is where Muncie, Indiana is. Muncie was a Potawatomi king, or chief, if I remember correctly. Kokomo, Indiana was another place named for an Indian chief. You go up to Peru, Indiana, it's in Miami County. That's where the Miami Indians had the last reservation in Indiana before they were all forced to move to Oklahoma back on the Trail of Tears in the 1840s. So Indiana has a very mixed history with Native Americans. It's very, very interesting, a lot of tragedy involved, and the Miami Indian tribe from Indiana still has not been able to receive federal recognition because they've said that there aren't enough of them, there's not enough of their culture still around. But if you go out here to get on State Road 37, you go north, get on to, I think it's State Road 13. 13 comes back to the White River and follows the White River for a couple of miles. That's one of those Native American trails that I'm talking about. It was right next to the river. You go into Miami County where the 7 pillars are on the Mississinewa River. The road is right next to that. The 7 pillar structure was a natural structure carved out by the water of the river. That was a Native American, a Miami Indian sacred space. River is really very, very shallow, but it's still there today. I've been there. It's really a neat place. There's even a story in my family that somebody several generations ago married a Native American woman. So I'm part Native American, but I've never been able to prove that. My family, on both sides of my family, have been in Indiana since the 1820s. So shouldn't be surprised if you hear me talk about the history, because, you know, they were farmers, they were ministers and teachers. And I've been to some family cemeteries where there was lots of little bitty headstones. And you know what that means from back in the day. Anybody else have comment or question about any of the Native American trade routes? Okay, and I think I have one more that we Last thing I want to talk about is kind of circling back to this idea of fair trades. And I'm going to stick with my Native American example for a minute. Did the white man trade fairly with the Native Americans when they got land, when they got New York City for $24? No, because they had no concept of the value in the same way that the Europeans did. They didn't think about owning land. The natives here thought the land belonged to God. Everyone benefited from it. So trade's not just a new issue, but there are situations that come up where people will make fun of them, make fun of trading and the concept of trade, or some of the political ramifications. Let's open this with slides, look better. And if you think about seeing these kind of things, a lot of you probably don't read the newspaper, which is okay. But in editorial cartoons, you see stuff like this. Got a couple of farmers over there, dairy producers, poultry producers standing next to a brick wall. Got a great big wrecking ball piece of equipment there with something on the side that says Trans-Pacific Trade Talks. And the wall that they're next to says protective tariffs. Where do you think that's happening? What's the setting for this cartoon? You see that big red maple leaf there on the wall and on the demolition equipment?
Canada.
Canada, yes, Canada. So it doesn't say that, but what this looks like, you hear something? These farmers aren't even aware of what's coming. That wall of protected tariffs in Canada for dairy and poultry producers is getting ready to get knocked down. And it's because of these trans-Pacific trade talks, the ability to trade across the Pacific Ocean with fewer restrictions. This is the last one I'm going to show you. There's a couple of others in here also, but we're about out of time. You see in this guy's right hand here is a whip. It's got the word Nafta up above it. On the right, he's got some shackles in his left hand with TPP. That's the Trans-Pacific Partnership. I already talked about NAFTA. This is some big fat cat for corporate America. And they're borrowing from the Martin Luther King "I Have a Dream" speech. Free trade at last, free trade at last. Thank God Almighty we have free trade at last. Who's the happiest about that? It's corporate America, according to this cartoon. But look at what's happened to the workers. U.S. workers, massive layoffs, vanishing worker rights. Workers abroad, slave wages, no workers' rights. People working in factories for $1 a day. The free trade people in the capitalist society would say that's okay. That's what we have to do to make a profit. And it's really up to each of us as individuals to decide if that's right or if that's fair. But that's kind of where we're at these days with trade and with free trade. You know, we have different politicians controlling the national legislative scene these days. So, you know, whether whether that'll change, I don't know. Questions, comments, anybody? Because we are out of time. All right, I'm gonna let everybody go. Think about all of that trade stuff in the context of that circular flow diagram and the things that Mr. Clifford talked about. They all are connected.
Thank you. Have a good weekend.
All right, thanks
Mr.
everybody.
Jay.
See y'all on Tuesday.